You're all very welcome to this Q&A session on the psychotherapy programs in UCD School of Medicine. My name is Dr. Barry O'Donnell. I'm the Director of Psychotherapy Programs in UCD School of Medicine and have particular responsibility as Program Director of the Higher Diploma in Psychotherapy Studies and the MSc in Psychoanalytic Psychotherapy and the Graduate Diploma in Psychoanalytic Studies, which we'll talk about shortly in turn. Before that, I'd like to introduce my colleagues, Dr. Valerie O'Brien, who is the Program Director of the MSc in Systemic Psychotherapy, and Mick Price, who is the Coordinator of the MSc in Group Analytic Psychotherapy. And both Valerie and Mick will speak to you shortly about the specific programs. And what we will then do when we get through these brief presentations and introductions, we will open the floor to Q&A, to questions, and hopefully we'll have a few answers. The other route you can go through is the chat box. You can send in questions and we'll respond to those as well as we go through the session. So I'm going to share the screen now, set of slides. Okay. Let's go here. Now, so the psychotherapy programs in UCD have a long history. The slide here will just in brief summarize where and when things began. Back in the 1970s, there was the development of work on family psychotherapy, systemic family psychotherapy, and psychoanalysis. The family psychotherapy work and interest and work with people coming in from having gained experience in it abroad was primarily taking place in the Mater Hospital, the Mater Misericordiae Hospital. That led to the setting up in 1980 of the Family Therapy Training Program. At the same time, over in St. Vincent's University Hospital, the work was going on, there was discussion going on, which led to the setting up in 1984 of the School of Psychotherapy and the launch of an MSc in Psychoanalytic Psychotherapy. Still in Vincent's in 1987, that Psychoanalytic Psychotherapy program was joined by the Group Analytic Therapy Training in the School of Psychotherapy. Back over in the Mater, the Family Therapy Training Program entered into an arrangement with UCD so that there was the launch of an MSc in Systemic Psychotherapy awarded by UCD, delivered in the Mater from 1989 onwards. And some years later, in 2001, Child Art Psychotherapy as a training was also introduced in the Mater. In 2007, the Higher Diploma in Psychotherapy Studies was launched in UCD, delivered from St. Vincent's University Hospital, the School of Medicine rooms there. And in 2009, 2 years of the 7-year training in Group Analytic Psychotherapy became a UCD MSc, so it's a UCD award alongside the other training awards from the School of Psychotherapy. And in 2014, the Graduate Diploma in Psychoanalytic Studies was launched. Again, it's the component of the MSc in Psychoanalytic Psychotherapy. So I know there's a lot in that, but just to give you a sense of these programs, these trainings going back over decades, and now what we have in the UCD programs is the culmination of that in 6 psychotherapy programs that either stand alone in fulfilling psychotherapy body requirements for membership, or else in conjunction with School of Psychotherapy programs combine to provide to fulfill the requirements for recognition by the psychotherapy bodies. I will say a little bit about that further in the next slide. So we have the Higher Diploma in Psychotherapy Studies, which is a 1-year full-time program, and it is a very effective point of entry into the field of psychotherapy. When we say it's 1 year full-time, we block teach it, so it's taught on a Tuesday afternoon between 2 and 7:15. So it is a program that can be taken by people who have other commitments in terms of family and work and such like things. And as I say, has been a very effective way for people who are very new to the psychotherapy field, are drawn to it, would like to find out about it, and they can spend 2 semesters hearing about it on that program. We'll say a little bit more about each of these programs as we go through. The Graduate Diploma in Psychoanalytic Studies is a 2-year part-time program. It is on a Wednesday afternoon between 2 and 7:45, and it is a theoretical engagement with psychoanalysis, as well as the requirement that you are in your own psychoanalysis. In terms of clinical training programs, we have 4 MSc programs. MSc in Psychoanalytic Psychotherapy, which is a 2-year program. MSc in Group Analytic Psychotherapy, also a 2-year program in terms of it being a UCD award. MSc in Child Art Psychotherapy, a 2-year program. And then the 4-year MSc in Systemic Family Psychotherapy. So I'm just going to go through these programs one by one with just some of the basic information about them. Then I'll ask Valerie to speak about the systemic program, and then I'll ask Mick to speak about the group analytic training. I suppose one of the things important before we go into the detail of them is that you are aware that the programs, the training is recognised in different ways by the Irish Council for Psychotherapy, or I should say the professional bodies that make up the ICP, which is an umbrella group. The ICP across the various modalities of psychotherapy have a minimum 4-year period of training required. So it is an important thing if you're considering entering into the psychotherapy field, you really are thinking of a minimum of 4 years and sometimes longer. It takes as long as it takes, but certainly the idea that it's done and dusted after a year or so is just not how it is. A decade or so you might be making some inroads. But so all of our training will provide you with a 4-year minimum period of study and training. The MSc in Systemic Psychotherapy, the entire program is a 4-year program. It's recognised by the Family Therapy Association of Ireland, which is a constituent of the ICP, and the 4 years are delivered by UCD. The MSc in Psychoanalytic Psychotherapy combines with a postmaster's 2-year program delivered by the School of Psychotherapy in St. Vincent's Hospital. That's a separate entity for the moment. And that combination of 4 years, 2 years plus 2 years, is recognised by the Association for Psychoanalysis and Psychotherapy in Ireland. That's a constituent body of the psychoanalytic section of the ICP. The MSc in Group Analytic Psychotherapy is a program that you progress onto where appropriate, and having fulfilled 4 years of training in the School of Psychotherapy in St. Vincent's Hospital. So that's set up differently. You do 4 years before getting to a point where you would qualify to apply for the MSc component of training. The complete minimum 7-year period really is what it takes. Period of training is recognised by the Irish Group Analytic Society, which is again a constituent member of the psychoanalytic section of the ICP. And then the MSc in Child Art Psychotherapy also has a postmaster's 2-year program with the School of Psychotherapy in St. Vincent's. This is work in progress, but the 4-year period of training does fulfill the requirements that have been worked out by the Association for Child Art Psychotherapy. There's just discussions going on to formalise that over the next year or so. So the message of importance here is that all UCD programs have arrangements in place for graduates to fulfill the psychotherapy body requirements in ICP to apply for membership. All of these things are of course very important, where your qualification is coming from, that it satisfies the requirements of professional bodies in that. But before we go into the detail of the different programs, probably the fundamental thing in your choice is your own very specific choice, your own singular subjective choice of what draws you into a particular form of work. You know, and I propose these questions to you. What grabs me and why? And to what form of work am I drawn? In which of these very different forms of practice can I invest myself? The modality of psychotherapy or psychoanalysis possesses a practitioner entirely or not at all, to paraphrase Sigmund Freud, one of the major figures in the history of psychotherapy and psychoanalysis. So this is a big question. Apart from looking at, what university, what school, what institution is providing the qualification, apart from looking at making sure that it's recognized and has professional body recognition, in the end of the day, it's you that's putting yourself into it, into a form of work that will fully occupy you, will concern you. It goes to the very core of what matters to you, and making that decision, finding that out, takes time. So we're not expecting after the end of the 60 minutes that you will have figured that out. But what's more important is that you know that it is a big question, and it's a big step, and it's a big investment, not just in terms of time and money, but more importantly, of yourselves into a form of work. So I'm going to just check and make sure there are not too many questions coming in. Are there any questions coming in? I don't see any just yet. I hope there will be questions. That's the point of the exercise. Okay, so the higher diploma in psychotherapy studies, as I say, is a 1-year full-time, 2 semesters. It's a 60 ECTS program. There are 6 modules on it. It's delivered on a Tuesday afternoon between 2 and 7:15. It's probably prime asset or aspect to it, though, that I'd emphasize is that it is taught by practitioner teachers. These are people who practice the forms of psychotherapy that are being represented on the program and come in and teach the students about the fundamental principles of that form of work, and give a very strong sense of what it is to be a practitioner in that form of work, because that's what they do. That's where they're coming from. It is not a clinical training. It does not contribute to that minimum 4-year period of study, because it's not a clinical training in itself. It's not a specific modality, but it is very clinically rich. And I would say, and we've testament to this over the years, where people say a year very well spent before making a major decision as to which modality you might be interested in taking up, particularly where you've no real experience or exposure to different forms of psychotherapy prior to answering this call within you that there's something about the word that draws you to it. So this will give you a good, well worth spending a year just informing yourself and seeing what step you might take from there. I'm going to talk about the MSc in Psychoanalytic Psychotherapy and the MSc in Child Art Psychotherapy and the Graduate Diploma in Psychoanalytic Studies, and before handing over to Valerie. The MSc in Psychoanalytic Psychotherapy is a 2-year program. It would be officially, therefore, part-time. I say officially because some of these programs are part-time. All of these programs are designated part-time, but I have not ever met a student who would describe their experience of it as part-time. As I said earlier, it occupies anybody in these endeavours fully. But officially, and it's important from the point of view of funding and that, these are and visas and that, this is a part-time designation. It's 13 modules. It is a clinical training in psychoanalytic psychotherapy with a strong research focus. It teaches the work of Sigmund Freud and Jacques Lacan. So it is very important that any student coming onto this program is interested in the work of these 2 figures, these pioneering figures in psychoanalysis, and is choosing to spend a couple of years reading their work and allowing their work to inform a practice position. It is taught on a Wednesday afternoon between 2 and 7:45 and on a Thursday between 9 and 1 o'clock. The Thursday morning is a clinical morning which starts with a psychiatric case conference in St. Vincent's Hospital. These are our colleagues in the field of psychiatry. It is very much psychiatry, and they are very open and welcoming to ourselves being there to shed a psychoanalytic perspective on their work and their questions and dilemmas. So it's a very dynamic, interesting weekly experience. Later on the Thursday morning, you have small group clinical supervision. It is a program, again, that's just part of how we deliver all of our psychotherapy programs, practitioner teacher delivery. The programs are taught by people who are actually practicing these forms of work. The MSc in Psychoanalytic Psychotherapy, the students begin their psychoanalytic practice with individual supervision weekly and group supervision weekly. So therefore, there's a very rigorous application process, because we need to make sure that it's an appropriate step for you to take to start practicing in this way, or to begin your exploration of this practice. Students are required to be in their own psychoanalysis, and psychoanalysis is a form of work that really requires you to be attending at least twice a week. So again, that's a choice that people make because they're drawn and interested in engaging in this and putting themselves into a psychoanalysis. So as I said earlier, the 4-year training requirement is provided by a postmaster's 2-year period with the School of Psychotherapy, and the combination of the UCD and the School of Psychotherapy qualifications is recognized by the APPI. The postmasters is very much about your ongoing practice, your clinical practice, your ongoing psychoanalysis, and your ongoing supervision of practice. The Graduate Diploma in Psychoanalytic Studies is a version of that master's program. It is, again, over the 2 years, it's 5 semesters, part-time for the same reason. It is the Wednesday afternoon of the MSc. Again, it's the same modules. You take this program, you're in the classroom with the students who are taking the MSc pathway. It teaches the work of Sigmund Freud and Jacques Lacan, as I say. These are the theoretical modules of the master's. The big difference is that students on the graduate diploma do not begin psychoanalytic practice, and therefore they do not come in on the Thursday morning and attend the psychiatric case conference. But the students are in their own psychoanalysis. Again, that would stand. Our fundamental principle is that it's not possible to really engage with the psychoanalytic field unless you engage with your own analysis. This program has been of interest to people who are both completely new to psychoanalytic practice and other forms of kind of psychotherapy or psychological practice, but it actually has been of interest to people who are very much in psychological practice, people coming from psychiatry, social work, psychology, other modalities of psychotherapy, and it's their way of finding out about the psychoanalytic field for a couple of years, and perhaps they might then go on to complete the master's component by taking up the practice modules. So, moving to a very different modality of psychotherapy, and our apologies, our colleague, Professor Aisling Mulligan, would have very much liked to have come, but she was otherwise occupied with her clinical work at this time. So the MSc in Child Art Psychotherapy is a 2-year program, 5 semesters, part-time, as I say, 90 ECTS and 12 modules. It is a clinical training, as with all our master's programs, with a strong research focus. Based in the Mater Hospital, the Catherine Macaulay Centre there, on a Friday. It is practitioner teacher delivered. Again, the same policy that we have, that you've people who are out there the other days of the week practicing child art psychotherapy, and then they come in and they speak about their work, and they provide supervision to the trainees on the programme. I suppose a really rich and central part of it is that you're on an 18-month placement. You spend 1 full day a week, apart from the Friday, 1 other day of the week you spend in a child and adolescent mental health setting. So you're getting extraordinary experience on the ground in these very challenging settings, and you would be under the supervision of a consultant psychiatrist there for that work. So you'd have that supervision as well as your specific child art psychotherapy supervision. The students engage in their own psychotherapy throughout. Again, like our MSc in Psychoanalytic Psychotherapy, the basic principle there is that in the psychotherapy field, we would hold that it is necessary to engage in your own personal psychotherapy work or psychotherapy exercises in order to engage with the questions that the practice poses for you, and for you to work out something of your relation to the practice. Because a psychotherapist is implicated in their work, and maybe that's an aspect of psychotherapy that makes it different from maybe other practice positions in the field of mental health or in the field of psychology, which take up a position of the practitioner as a kind of an objective observer, and that yields its own rich effects, but it's a different practice position in psychotherapy that requires this kind of personal experience of psychotherapy and work on oneself. So there are discussions in progress with the Association for Child Art Psychotherapy in Ireland for the 4-year training, which combines the 2-year MSc and then 2-year post-MSc program that we have in the School of Psychotherapy in St. Vincent's Hospital. School of Psychotherapy and UCD therefore are in this partnership in the delivery of psychotherapy training that has evolved over the last number of decades. So at this point, I'm delighted to invite Valerie, Dr. Valerie O'Brien, to speak to you about the MSc in Systemic Psychotherapy. Is that okay, Valerie? You can see that?
Yes, yeah. And now, Barry, in case my internet goes, you pick up in case I have a difficulty at this end.
I will do.
Or the evening can happen. Okay, so very nice to be here this evening. So the Systemic Psychotherapy program, which is a 4-year part-time master's, is also known as a family therapy qualification. So people use systemic psychotherapy and family therapy interchangeably. The important issue of this program is that all training is conducted as part of the 4 years that you will spend in UCD. Though in year 2, 3, and 4, it is both theoretical and you will be involved in clinical practice. Within clinical practice, a characteristic of family therapy training, systemic psychotherapy, is that some of the clinical training takes place as part of a group. So you have a team of family therapists led by a therapist and overseen by a clinical supervisor who works directly with families. So what is family therapy? What is systemic psychotherapy? Systemic psychotherapy is a practice that has a focus on multiple relationships. It has a focus on the context in which individuals, couples, families, and groups live. And it has a focus on how we construct meaning. That is the major characteristic of a family therapy approach. It means that you're working with more than one person in the room at the same time, though you can also, on graduating from a systemic psychotherapy, you can work with individuals, couples, families, and organizations with the training. Barry has talked about the 4-year training it's the minimum qualifications to be registered as a psychotherapist. But that's 4 years on top of an undergraduate degree. So the minimum qualifications for any psychotherapy training is 7 years, 3 years undergraduate and 4 years graduate training. And within this program, all is provided under the auspices of the MSc in Systemic Psychotherapy. So you start in year 1, it is a Wednesday afternoon from 2 to 7. In year 2 and 3, it's a Wednesday and then a Thursday, and then in year 4, it is on a Tuesday. Alongside those days, in year 3 and year 4, people are also involved approximately half day a week in their own clinical practice, of which the clinical supervision is also provided as the program. And alongside that, a focus on reflexivity and what we bring into the room when we're working with families, when we're working with individuals or couples, is a central focus on the development of the therapist. But within systemic psychotherapy, we do that as part of a group process. So unlike psychoanalytical training where people are involved in their own individual therapy, within a systemic psychotherapy training, that focus is very much within the group. But that does not stop the individual if they choose to engage in their own individual therapy, but it is not a requirement of the program. And I think the other important issue that on graduation from this 4-year part-time, very intensive program, you are ready for registration as a psychotherapist with the Family Therapy Association of Ireland and ICP. Now that will be very important as statutory registration comes into place, which we're envisaging will happen in the next, my prediction is within the next 3 to 5 years. But it means that that qualification will then be used as the basis for that core registration. So we take about 17 people into first year, and then we provide a training for that cohort across the 4 years. We don't take entry in any other year unless somebody has already undertaken a family therapy training in another institute and wants to join our program at year 2 or 3. So that's it in a nutshell. It's based in UCD. Our clinical sites at the minute are in a CAMS in Lindara, in DCU, and we're currently looking at other clinical sites in the West Dublin area. So Barry, I think that's the overview.
Thank you very much, Valerie. Yeah, no, that's very, very good. And yeah, that's you put it very well there. So is the sound coming in?
Yeah, fine.
Yeah, that different arrangements for work on the self, or the practitioners work on themselves, such that in the psychoanalytic, it's individual because it's an individual form of work, but in the family, it's in the group, but also, as we'll hear maybe from Mick now, it's a group analytic therapy that a trainee would enter into on the group analytic. So Mick, can I ask you to come in? You have slides that you're going to?
Yeah, I think Stephen's going to load them up once you're.
I'll take this down.
Yeah. Yeah, okay, and if you move it on, Stephen. Okay, so yeah, thank you, Barry, and thank you, Valerie. A huge amount of information to disseminate, and welcome to everyone. I suppose let's take a look at group analysis and group analytic psychotherapy through a nuanced version, I suppose. So why group analysis is probably the question best asked at the outset. And I suppose we all live and work in groups, and in our relationships with family and friends, and professionally in our relationship in the workplace, we're often at a loss as to what might be going on in the dynamics of these groups, especially when difficulties arise, as they inevitably do. The course is open to people who are interested in deepening their understanding of group dynamics in both the personal and professional setting, and in learning about the potential application of group analysis in clinical or organizational contexts. Drawing on the theories of our founding pioneer in group analysis, Michael Fuchs, who was always of the view that the individual can only be understood in the context of their groups, and the experiential foundation training develops an in-depth understanding of how group dynamics influence the individual and how the individual's dynamic influence the group. The training also explores the unconscious dynamics in groups. So what is group analysis? Group analysis is a form of psychotherapy by the group, of the group, including the group therapist or conductor. It aims to achieve a healthy integration within the individual and in their network of relationships. Focusing on the relationship between the individual and the group, it places emphasis on essentially the social nature of human experience. It's an interactive approach, as well as the provision of psychotherapy. It has application in the field of human resources, teaching, training, work groups, and organizational consultancy. The theory and method of group analysis is concerned with the dynamic understanding of the inner working of the human mind as a social, multi-personal phenomenon, a quote from Michael Fuchs, and as such can be applied to groups, individuals, couples, families, and applied groups. It might be useful to reflect on the route to group analysis, because it can be varied from both the medical, the academic, and the corporate world. So I'll just share in a nutshell my own route into group analysis. I suppose over 30 years ago, I would have been working with an addiction centre, an abstinence-based residential treatment centre, that was looking for volunteers to run an aftercare program, which ran for a 2-year period, where the person who was in primary addiction treatment on re-emerging to society joined a weekly group with a concerned other, as in their partner, their husband or wife, sibling, mother or father. So we began to set up and run aftercare groups over a 2-year period to allow people to reintegrate back into society, recognizing the challenges that addiction presented them with. What became very evident over a short period of time was the inevitability of relapse in addiction. And I suppose at the time there would have been not much patience or tolerance for relapse, but we began to look at it from a humanistic perspective. And that was that with any other life-threatening condition, you would be entitled to re-enter into a caring program. So therefore we began to specialize in relapse. And I pioneered a relapse group in the Dublin area for this particular treatment center. And also what was very evident was that family members were oftentimes more traumatized than the person who was in primary treatment, because basically the person who was either drinking or drugging oftentimes could have been anesthetized and unaware of the impact that they were having, while family members were having to live with all of this. In taking up this role, I would have had sort of light touch enough skills and introduction around the academic, very limited academic science around addiction at the time. So it was learning on the hoof, I suppose, really, and I was very conscious of the need to upskill. So I would have done initially a counselling course, but when I began to work with relapse people and family members, it was very evident that I needed even more upskilling. So I went to do the foundation course in group analysis in St. Vincent's. And fell in love with the work and the concepts, and it stayed for the 7 years and graduated. And I suppose what it afforded me was a greater insight into what was going on in the groups that I was working with. So it afforded me greater opportunity to explore therapeutically with clients what was bothering them. In parallel with all of this, I was working in the corporate world at the time, so there was an inevitability that I was going to get drawn into the organizations side of the organizations, the charities that I was working with. And in 2 charities in particular, I was engaged to chair the board through a very significant transition. A transition in the first instance from a charismatic foundress to the new horizon, as it were. And oftentimes they can be very, very vulnerable periods for organizations. And in the next organization, it was from a very significant charismatic leader in an organization, again to replace a chief executive who had been in place for 25 to 30 years. So it was working with the senior management team, with the founding fathers, as it were, in both instances, to ensure the ethos remained, and more importantly, right the way down, cascading through the organization. And that too came into play in the concept of putting in place strategic plans for organizations. So it's really, it was an extraordinarily useful tool for me in terms of working with management teams and executive structures to evoke change. We might move on from there, Stephen. So just about a quick word or race through the evolution of group analysis. And I suppose there's various instances around a lot of the courses. Freud is the starting point. You know, he pioneered a new science, as it were. And in the early days, like with all new sciences, there were a number of disciples, Carl Jung, Adler, Ferenczi, Rank, and Abraham, or many more as well, began to evolve this new science. And I suppose the one that was probably key in terms of the cosmopolitan spread of psychoanalysis was probably Ernest Jones. I think he was a Welshman, but he would have introduced Freud to the American audience, and then he was quite instrumental in introducing psychoanalysis to the United Kingdom, and would have pioneered Freud's move across to the United Kingdom during the Second World War. Moving through the decades then, in the context of group analysis, Northfield Psychiatric Hospital, one of the largest psychiatric units in the UK outside Birmingham, was a key location during the Second World War. For the very simple reason that the British Army were very concerned about the high level of people being returned to the psychiatric hospital suffering from shell shock. Nowadays, it would be recognized as post-traumatic stress disorder. But back then, it was shell shock. And the notion was, get these guys well, recycle them back to the war front, or discharge them to Civvy Street. But they wanted basically to get the army repleted back to the front. 2 people were key in working psychoanalytically in that organization. Wilfred Behan was the first in the door, and he introduced the notion of free association with large groups. However, he wouldn't be very political, and therefore the structure of an army, which is quite hierarchical, would have seen this as almost anarchy. So he was fired within a month. And next in was Michael Fuchs. He, because of his age and because of his experience, was far more useful in introducing a new way of working, and group analysis took off. It was accepted by the army as providing success, and also it began to filter into the NHS once the war was over. The next cohort would have included people like Ballant, Melanie Klein, Winnicott and Bowlby, and it goes on. We might move to the next slide now. In the context of the Masters in Group Analytic Psychotherapy, the Masters itself is a 2-year program over 5 semesters with 13 modules. It's a clinical training with a very strong experiential and research focus. Before you get to the Masters level, there is a 4 years training requirement in the School of Psychotherapy. It consists of a foundation certificate, which is year 1. It's an introductory course, a broad taster sample, as it were, of what's available on the course. That leads on to a diploma in group work practice, which is a 2-year program. And then there's an interview process, which moves you to a qualifying course. And then at that stage, you begin to join the Masters in Group Analytic Psychotherapy. The course runs over 9 weekends. It's practitioner-teacher delivery. The students engage in their own experiential psychotherapy, group analytic therapy throughout. And as Barry would have already mentioned, it's recognised by the Irish Group Analytic Society, which is a member of the psychoanalytic section of ICP. Next one, Stephen. Just in terms of a quick whistle stop through the modules, psychoanalytic theory, group analytic theory, therapy skills, ethics and professional practice, psychopathology, the social unconscious in groups and in organizations. Next one, communications theory, and a very strong emphasis on supervision once people are engaged in setting up and running groups. Supervision of clinical practice, supervision of reflective journals, which are the tools which students use to document the work that they're doing, and advanced clinical supervision. Clinical group practice is an extension of same. And of course, it all concludes with a thesis and research component, which is a mini thesis. So the application of group analysis then on a conventional clinical therapeutic basis, group analysis is a form of psychotherapy based on the idea that our individual difficulties occur within the context of a relationship with others and society as a whole. It focuses simultaneously on the here and now and the origins and cause of concerns in the past and how we might move beyond these. The experience of belonging to a group over time can in and of itself be healing. To be part of and to have a sense of belonging, these are valuable achievements in a pressurized time that we live in an alienated existence. And as I said earlier, applied group analysis in organizations, teams and staff works is very commonplace in the UK and becoming more and more commonplace here in Ireland. So with the long and distinguished track record of expertise in group dynamics, group analysis articulates which can be observed in all groups and pays close attention to the relationship between each individual and the group as a whole, making it a particularly valuable model for working with teams and offering reflective practice groups. It is especially valuable for those leading or working with diverse multidisciplinary teams in complex or challenging settings. So it's been a sort of a whistle-stop tour through group analysis, but more is available on request. So thanks, Barry, for your patience.
Thank you very much, Mick. That was, as you say, whistle stop, but very interesting with your own journey into the field. That was very engaging. So at this point, we welcome questions. I think there's a question coming in there. Stephen, we can't see those attending. So we're just going on the basis of questions.
Yeah, what I might do, Dr. O'Donnell, is turn on everybody's mics and cameras if they would like to speak. Otherwise, you know, they can keep them off and they can write their questions in the Q&A. So I'll go and I'll do that now. Okay.
So while you're doing that, there's a question in from Paulina Kostadinova, and Paulina, you had written to me you're interested in the MSc in Psychoanalytic Psychotherapy. You're coming from business, yeah, you're wondering about eligibility. All of our psychotherapy master's programs you can apply for directly. I suppose the exception is the group analytic, where you apply after 4 years of training in the School of Psychotherapy programs. Obviously, if you make an application, you have to be coming from a background and have suitable and appropriate kind of experience and relation to it. So I suppose that's where, yeah, and I know, Valerie, you were saying about an undergraduate degree. I suppose there are different maybe assessments of what's a suitable or the required undergraduate degree. I think in broad terms, there might be a preference for something that falls under the description of the social sciences. I know in the psychoanalytic field, the MSc in Psychoanalytic Psychotherapy, was because we follow the work of Freud. We work on the basis that each and every one of us is a subject of the unconscious, no matter what field of work we're in or what our history is. So the main thing we're interested in on the psychoanalytic program, Paulina, is that your undergraduate studies in that, or whatever, maybe postgraduate indeed, they indicate to us that you have an academic ability. We then have further questions as to why would you be interested in engaging with the texts of Sigmund Freud and the texts of Jacques Lacan, which are, you know, challenging, complex texts. And I suppose we'd need to hear from you, each of you, if you're interested. We'd ask you to respond to that question. I suppose in the, as you specified, the psychoanalytic, probably the strongest concern we have is whether you actually want to choose to enter into your own analysis. I suppose the best way we can hear your response to that is that if you've already done it, if prior to your application you're already engaged in something of your own analysis, that you've started that, you've made that commitment. So does that answer? I don't know, Paulina, do you want to come in?
Yeah, thank you very much, Barry.
Okay.
Yeah, that kind of makes it a little bit clearer.
Mm-hmm.
The reason I was kind of asking this question is because I also was looking at the higher diploma in psychotherapy studies. So I was wondering if my background doesn't really qualify as close enough or relevant enough. Would it make sense for that year until the next available slots, next slots become available for that program, if I do the higher diploma in the meantime? Would that be a way of making it easier to qualify then further for the psychoanalytic psychotherapy?
Yeah, the simple answer is yes, because, well, first of all, we get to know the students on the higher diploma. So if they're then going on to apply for one of the masters, we obviously know them and would be able to hopefully stand over the application and support them in it. But it also gives, where you're coming from a field which is, you know, your studies and your academic endeavor to date has not involved reading psychoanalytic and psychotherapy texts and thinking, you know, the whole point of, you know, Valerie, you were saying about the state in the coming years, somewhere in the next 3 to 5 years, we expect there to be a requirement for there to be a state, you know, if you're practicing under the title psychotherapist, you need to be on a state register. And I suppose what that says is that this is a very specific form of work or field of work. It's not the same as psychology, because there'd be a different state register for that. It's not the same as psychiatry or other kinds of forms of work. So I suppose the higher diploma is a year spent maybe coming to appreciate what that difference is between a form of work that's described as psychotherapy and other kind of practice positions. And then furthermore, within psychotherapy, the difference is there, that there are these very different forms of work that all, I think, appropriately fall under the title psychotherapy, but they're very different practice positions in that. So I suppose, you know, this is why we launched the higher diploma in 2007, to provide people with that year researching, finding out themselves about these forms of work and coming to their own decision as to what form of work they might then apply for.
Barry, can I come in here too and just say
Yes.
something about the distinction? I make a distinction on the Masters in Systemic Psychotherapy between what I call people who are already in the core professions. So a lot of the core professions that opt to come in to do a family therapy, systemic psychotherapy training are social workers, psychologists, psychiatrists, nurses who are involved in mental health work. increasingly speech and language therapy, some teachers. So that's what I would say, that people that have a clinical base. Now with teachers, I would say that people are encouraged to set up the year before they come in a level of clinical work, clinical experience. It might be Rape Crisis Centre, it might be Women's Aid, it might be Childline, etc., where they're involved in one-to-one conversations that have a support, a therapeutic element. So that's what I would call career progression. And very often people that come in from those careers, when on graduation, continue to hold what I would call a dual identity, professional identity. They're psychologists and a psychotherapist, they're social workers and a psychotherapist. And some people opt to stay working in the public sector in their core job and work privately in the other. Alongside that, there's a much smaller cohort that come in to from what I would call a change of career. And some people that have come in from that direction in the last couple of years that come to mind, for example, somebody in HR. Now they have been immersed in working with, as Mick said, in organizations, with teams, with individuals, from a problem-solving basis, but not from a therapeutic. And again, we would encourage, alongside doing the program, we would encourage them, particularly in the first year, to get a level of clinical experience, again through voluntary sector, so that they can build up. So, but the difference, I think, Barry, between doing the systemic psychotherapy program and the others is that the clinical course or the clinical program provides the clinical opportunity as part of teams. So the work of the trainee psychotherapist is being directly observed. So that level of organization provides a level of flexibility in terms of taking a small number of change of career people. But I think for anybody here tonight who have an interest in psychotherapy, the first distinction is, what is it that speaks to you in terms of modality? Am I interested in more psychoanalytical? Am I interested in group? You know, because the big distinctions within psychotherapy, the big distinctions is a psychoanalytical base, is a humanistic, is a systemic, is a behavioral approach. And through Barry's higher diploma, you do get an introduction to all of those. But people already, when they come on webinars, know what speaks to them. What makes sense? What's the value base? What's my interest? How do I think humans operate? But just to say that within that, you know, the progression, so I see a question there about coming from a background in education, which could be best suited to me. I think it really depends on what your interest is in terms of what speaks to you. Are you drawn more to Freudian psychoanalytical? Are you drawn to more sort of wider systemic pieces? But I think it's through the higher, but I mean, for some people, this is an expensive training. Overall, the Masters in Systemic costs almost 30,000 across the 4 years. All the fees, like all the expenses for the 4-year systemic psychotherapy are contained in the UCD fee. There are no additional expenses, but like 30,000 over 4 years, it's a big investment. So you need to know what it is that's going to keep you engaged, but also one that's, because it's a career change, it's a professional training. I don't know, Barry, if you want to say anything about fees or how the fees are structured in the other programs.
Well, I suppose what I would want to say is that you're not asked to come up with the 30,000 all in one go. That it's over the 4 years, let's say, and you know, because all of the trainings take at least 4 years. Okay, give or take, you're talking about that kind of investment. The fees can fluctuate depending on where you are. The MSc Psychoanalytic and the MSc Child Art and the MSc Group Analytic are about 7,000 to 8,000 for those 2 years, and then they cost less for the other years because there's less components of it. It's more to do with practice. But no, I mean, Valerie, put it very well. I mean, the emphasis on, you know, in the end of the day, you know, anybody interested in these forms of work makes a decision, chooses one, and you know, as I said on the slide, you really are putting yourself into it. You will do it with all the resistance and reluctance and the usual things that accompany our human endeavors, our doubts, our questions, and that. But you actually will be putting yourself into it and committing yourself to it, finding yourself committing to it. And I think, Mick, your account of your own journey, you just started doing some work, voluntary work, just got involved, became interested in finding out what's going on in the group, and then found this extraordinary training that really looks at that and teases it out, and then you take your steps through that. It's not all done in one fell swoop of 7 years or 10 years or whatever. You take it year by year, one of the valuable aspects of the higher diploma, I see a couple of questions in around this. It isn't mandatory or a prerequisite for applying for any of the masters, but it can make a lot of sense to, you know, again, bearing in mind it's a year, it's costs, the fee there is in around €5,000. But it's, I think, a very worthwhile investment, because it gives you that time when you are coming from a different field, when you maybe know more about psychotherapy and psychoanalysis than you think, but this will give it to you in a structured way. It will get you into studying, reading. You have to do a number of essays, you have to do presentations and reports, and that you have to write a 6,000-word dissertation at the end. So you're getting into thinking about this form of, you know, this field of work, I should say, and the forms of work within it, which, as Valerie is saying and Mick is saying and I'm saying, are quite distinct in themselves. I think, Susanna, you had a question there about for the higher diploma and psychotherapists. Well, the thing about the higher diploma is that it doesn't require you to be in your own psychotherapy. You can so choose, and usually, I mean, unless you ask somebody in the field, and they might give you names of practitioners, but usually the place to go is to the professional bodies, who will have a list of accredited practitioners on their websites. So that's where you can go. But the thing about the higher diploma is that, you know, I suppose if you're thinking in that direction, I'd be saying you maybe want to start the program, and as you go through it, you might make that important decision of what form of work you're going to choose to contact a psychotherapist in.
Barry, could I take Angelina's question, because I think it may be more to mine. Angelina has asked, having completed my undergraduate in the US, is the higher diploma something that has to be done first? So I think, Barry, you answer that it doesn't have to be.
Doesn't have to be.
It depends. If I was to look, and our applications will now, you know, remain open until mid-June, but it would depend on what your undergraduate degree is, and B, it would depend on what you've been doing since. So for you to consider making a direct application to the 4-year systemic psychotherapy, you would need to have a level. You would need to have a level of human service involvement. And now human service might be through a HR role, or it could be through your intern year or whatever. But I think the best thing, Angelina, is what you could do is directly email me if you have a specific question about, I think that's probably the best, or my best advice to you, if you have a specific question about the family therapy program.
And Barry, I wonder, might I just say that I'd absolutely reiterate everything both yourself and Valerie have said, but just one caveat at the outset, and that is that human nature is such that we would always think in terms of academic credits or transferability, and also career progression. You know, I mean, there are very practical, pragmatic notions as you would interrogate any course of learning. But I would encourage the notion of the vocational dimension. And I would also encourage the notion of the curiosity and the innovative approach. Because I suppose what we've experienced on the group analytics side over recent years is the diversity and spread of sectors that are sourcing candidates for us nowadays. You know, it goes from the corporate world to the social science world to the education. And that's where the introductory year is very useful, because it's a filter. It's like a taster menu. It gives you a broad spread to whet the curiosity and begin to refine the determination about which route to go down. But there is that dimension of almost an innate desire to be involved at a humanistic level. You know, the modality emerges in its own time, sooner for some than others. But the important piece is the curiosity and perhaps even the vocational dimension of it.
And you know, I'd say that, I mean, it's hopefully, you know, for people that can coincide with a career pathway and qualifications and that. It is the case, though, that certainly in the Irish situation, psychotherapy is not as well represented in, say, health and social care services. It's not there, but it's not there in a very structured career structured way. So we are hopeful that might change, but that doesn't take away from the that what Mick is saying, that the vocational, and I suppose that's why I started at the beginning there saying these forms of work have emerged since the 1970s. So we're talking about 50 years almost of these forms of work being around and people developing programs and that. So there are a lot of people who've come through, a lot of graduates, and they've done very interesting things. They've combined it with maybe jobs they already have in the health services, maybe, or the education services, or maybe they've just developed and when the time is right, set up as a private practitioner and that, you know, using their own initiative, their own innovation to develop something, and because of their commitment to it, finding their way with it and making a living. I mean, at the same time, not making enough of a living to forgo being able to give out about never having enough, you know, money. But sure, that's we're all in that boat. So the other question that I want to address, because I know we're just at time now, as was specific to the times that we're in. Over the last year, it has been the case that our programs have been delivered online because of the pandemic. We are all very hopeful that we will be returning to the classroom and to person-to-person supervision arrangements, etc., come September. We have yet to make a decision whether we will be adopting a kind of blended approach for some of the programs where that might be possible. Psychotherapy, there's a part of it on every one of the programs that really needs people to be in the room with one another and on a regular basis, and not just turning up from time to time or on a screen. So we have to work that out. I suppose the program that lends itself most to the blended is the higher diploma. But even that, you know, we're very clear that we've lost something this last year in terms of the interaction in the higher diploma is always a manageable kind of small enough group, well, small in the sense of maybe 10, 15, maybe maximum 20 students on it. So there's that intimacy and interaction that you have with people in the asides, in the coffee, in the little moments of interaction that go to enrich the experience of a course that we don't have on the Zoom format. But as I say, we have to make a decision on that over the coming weeks, when it becomes clear that it is realistic to presume that we'll be back in the classroom in September, and then to see might there be another strand to it. So if you are interested, as Valerie is saying, as Mick is saying, I'd recommend you to keep in touch with us. You can always drop us an email. You might be at a point where the best next step is to put in an application or to complete an application. What I emphasize to people, because they can do that with trepidation, particularly after all that we've been throwing at you. If you put in an application, it doesn't mean that you're going to take the course. First of all, you have to get through the application process. You have to get through interviews. Now, all going well and they come your way, what the conclusion is that you are offered a place. You still don't have to do it. You choose to accept the offer, or you decide, actually, you know what, I'm not going to do that. So I would encourage you to think of an application process as your own research, because in it you get to meet people like myself, Valerie, Mick, who are involved in the delivery of the programs, or Ashton Mulligan, Professor Mulligan, on the child art. And that informs you. Do I want to be doing this work? I'm finding out more about it. As I said, the interviews are probably going to be Zoom for the next little while, but it is more person to person than this format. And as I say, the outcome being all going well, you'll be offered a place on the program, and then it's in your hands. You make a decision on it.
Barry, can I just say one thing, just in case somebody is so enthusiastic this evening and goes to put in an application for the family therapy program. Currently, it will come up as if it's closed, because we closed, but we've decided to reopen to facilitate anybody coming here this evening in case they're inspired. So it may not be open this evening, but it will be open over the next couple of days. So if you're really enthusiastic about putting in an application to family therapy, just come. Don't be put off if it looks as if it's closed. Just come back in a couple of days. But also you can contact me directly. I've put up my email address. So Barry, again, your email address and Mick's, would that be useful?
Yes, they should go up. Stephen, you might. I've lost the chat box now.
Will I put it up?
Yeah, for the group analytic, it's the first year of that is delivered by the School of Psychotherapy. That, as I say, is this entity that is in the St. Vincent's University Hospital and is a partner with the UCD in the delivery of the group analytic training.
So what email will I put up, Barry?
So that's info@tsop.ie. tsop.ie.
Okay.
And mine then is barry.o'donnell@ucd.ie, the standard UCD. But I think, Stephen, am I right? This is available to all of those attending. They'd get that in an email going out, the contacts and that.
Yes, I think when we wrap up this evening, I'll send a wrap-up email with everybody's contact details, just in case they didn't note them down. Sure.
Yes,
Barry, there's another question in there.
Paulina, yes, the application for the higher diploma is still open. It'll be open certainly into June. So you're very welcome to put an application in. And as I say, that just means that we can talk to you in more detail. And if all going well, you'll be offered a place if that's the way the application goes. And then it's in your hands. You can decide then. All we'd ask is not last minute, so we can prepare ourselves. But
lastminute.com.
Yes, yeah. Not recommended in the psychotherapy field.